Hi, 12s, welcome back. All right, we just looked at anaerobic fermentation. So again, produces only 2 ATP per glucose, so it's inefficient, but it is fast, but it cannot continue indefinitely. Okay. Um, we looked at the factors affecting cellular respiration in total, which was temperature, pH, glucose availability, oxygen availability, and of course, enzyme inhibitions. All right, we'll talk about biofuels very shortly in this video. Again, it's going to be another short one. And this will be the last video before I move on to Unit 4, Area Study 1, which is going to be an interesting one. Okay. So, uses and applications of anaerobic fermentation of biomass for biofuel production. What is a biofuel? It's essentially some sort of fuel that we can use made up from organic material known as biomass, which is essentially either animal or plant materials that are left over and can be sourced from any industries. It could be forestry, you lop down a bunch of trees. Is there part of the trees that you're not going to use for timber? Okay, that could be used as biomass. Okay, agriculture, you eat your corn, but the offcuts of the corn, like the outside part or the stem of the plant, all right, spare coconut shells, all of that stuff, that is your biomass. Okay, it can be converted into fuels. It's known as a renewable energy source. Right? Biofuels including bioethanol, biogas, and biodiesel, which of course is better than using something like fossil fuels. Although, if you're going to be realistic about it, is it able to fuel everything on Earth? No, it's not. But is it an interesting renewable that can, supplement the non-renewables? Definitely. There's a bunch of steps in the process of creating bioethanol. We will go through it, but I'm not entirely sure if this is required by VCAR, but we will talk about it. So when you're using anaerobic fermentation, it's essentially you deconstruct the biomass. All right, so you break it down, chemical or physical change here. All right. Step 2, digestion by enzymes. You send in enzymes such as amylase to break down the starch and cellulose. All right. And again, breakdown of polysaccharides is aided by water hydrolysis process. Step 3, ethanol fermentation. All right, then the yeast is thrown in there and is used to facilitate the anaerobic fermentation of the sugars. All right. A large amount of ethanol is produced as a product of this fermentation because of course yeast makes that ethanol, and of course carbon dioxide will also be another output or byproduct. The ethanol diffuses out of the yeast cells and is collected and harnessed for biofuel. That's probably the most important step because that's specifically what the dot point is. Okay, for the VCAR dot point. So just keep this one in mind. And then step 4, you can purify it and dehydrate it, and then it can be mixed or used as a fuel. Okay, as you can see here, you get down to the old servo, all right, and you have your ethanol 85, all right, 85% ethanol, or E10 unleaded 91, so ethanol 10%, etc., etc. Although, is this really effective for regular cars that are built for basic fossil fuels unleaded? Not really. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind. And there's also the carbon neutral cycle, which is really what biofuels rely on to be essentially renewable. And that is that, your carbon dioxide gets absorbed by your plants. All right. You harvest your crops. Then you have your stuff left over. That can be converted into biomass via fermentation. All right. The carbon dioxide is then released via the fermentation process and via the fuel being burnt as well, and that just continues to circle around. Okay, so that's the carbon neutral cycle. All right, there's something to be said about first and second generation biofuels, although it's really not that important, but most biofuels are made up of second generation biofuels. Okay, so it's non-edible crop waste, but it's pretty difficult and hard to break down. Okay, so that's your summary there. I'll see you in the next video.